Thanks, guys. Thanks, AV team. Thanks, Jack, for the kind introduction. Thank you guys for having me here. I just want to start by saying that I am a Kiwi. I live in Christchurch, New Zealand. I've been living there for 13 years. I became a citizen in 2013. And you might think it's strange that I come to Alice Springs to harp on the fact that I'm a Kiwi, but I feel it's kind of important to call that out because I know you can tell from my accent that I'm not from New Zealand originally, and the alternative is a little embarrassing just at present. Like I know as soon as I say that I'm from America, what everybody's thinking, which is what the heck is going on over there? And I bring this up not to make a political point. There might be people in this room who are Trump supporters. It's none of my business, although we should talk. But more because it's just so surprising that this man is the president, right? It's been over a year and it's still so surprising that he's in office. Like, and I'm not saying that's not a mean thing to say. He was surprised when he won. Like everybody was surprised by this. Every poll, every pundit, every editorial, like everybody had this election going the other way. Nate Silver, the guru statistician who rose to fame in the 2012 election for correctly anticipating every one of the 50 states, the morning of the 2016 election, this is how he had it pegged. 71% Clinton, 28% Trump. Everybody got this wrong, except for this fish, which correctly ate off of a picture of Donald Trump instead of one of Hillary Clinton. And this artificially intelligent predictive system, which correctly anticipated the results of the election weeks out. So this is the kind of thing that's interesting to me. How is it possible that the humans are getting it so wrong and the computers are getting it so right? So as Jack said, I am the New Zealand and Australian ambassador for an organization called Singularity University. Singularity University is based in Silicon Valley, housed at the NASA Ames Research Center, and it was founded by these two guys, and these guys are really kind of titans of the tech world. The guy on the right is Peter Diamandis. He started X Prize Foundation. X Prize Foundation does large cash prizes for extremely ambitious but extremely well-bounded engineering challenges. So the first one that they did was a $10 million US prize for the first private group that could get a manned vehicle to space and back, land it safely, and then repeat that feat within 2 weeks. And that prize is what led to Virgin Galactic, it's what led to SpaceX, like pretty much the entire private space industry was kickstarted by this large cash prize. And they've gone on to replicate that model in all sorts of industries and all sorts of endeavors. They've used it for healthcare, for education, for drought. And they found that as a model for spurring investment into R&D and innovation, it's tremendously effective. They put up this large cash prize. They put up a challenge that is ambitious enough to stir men's souls. And the teams who are competing for the prize will collectively invest anywhere from 10 to 100 times the value of the prize. Think about that for a second. $10 million prize, $100 million to $1 billion worth of investment in trying to address the challenge. Not only that, but you get hundreds of perspectives on the issue rather than just one. Peter's done all sorts of other things. He started International Space University. He started a company called Planetary Resources, which is mining asteroids. If you think Australia has some rich resources, you should try asteroid mining. He started a company called Human Longevity, Inc. with J. Craig Venter, who decoded the human genome. He's a tremendously accomplished guy, but the guy on the left is even more relevant to this morning's conversation. His name, as Jack said, is Ray Kurzweil, and he invented everything. He invented flatbed scanners. He invented optical character recognition. He invented text-to-speech for blind people. He invented the Kurzweil synthesizer. He's got 21 honorary doctorates. He's received honors from 3 US presidents. He's written 7 books, 5 of them bestsellers. He's a director of engineering at Google, like total underachiever. But one of the most interesting things about Ray is that they've gone back and looked at the predictions he's made about where technology is going since the late 80s, early 90s. And they found that he has an astonishing 86% accuracy rate. 86%. It's a tremendous achievement. If you think about some of the dramatic technological changes we've seen over the past 20, 30 years, 86%, it's really quite extraordinary. To the degree that he predicted that by 1998, a computer would beat a human at chess. And of course, in 1997, IBM's Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov. To that level of specificity. So when Ray Kurzweil says something about where technology is going, generally worth paying attention to him. So I first got involved with these guys a little over 3 years ago. I attended their executive program. It's a 6-day program at their headquarters at NASA Ames. And I'll tell you what, I went there thinking it was going to be fun. I did not go there thinking it would completely upend everything I understood about the world and completely transform my view of technological advancement and of its impact on every single one of us. But of course, that is exactly what happened. I came away feeling like I had gone down this rabbit hole and I could not emerge. I could not unlearn what I had learned. And I had this profound sense of urgency and responsibility to help more people understand what I learned, because it affects every single one of us. It affects every industry. It absolutely affects your industry. It affects our government. It affects our healthcare system, our education system. Everything about the way that we live and work is touched by these trajectories, and it is unconscionable to me to not help more people understand this stuff so that collectively we can make more informed choices. So my job over the next 25 minutes or so is to basically condense everything I learned in those 6 days down into 3 core insights. And one of the things I do want to say is that, you might be sort of enjoying this, and I'm betting that about halfway through my talk, you're going to go, what the heck does this have to do with being a cattleman? And I promise you we will come back around to that. So if you do just stick with me and come with me on this journey, I promise you it'll be worthwhile. So 3 core insights, and the first one starts with this guy. So this is Gordon Moore. He's one of the co-founders of Intel Corporation. And in 1965, he made the observation that the number of transistors we could fit on an integrated circuit had been doubling every 18 months, as far back as we could see. And he made a prediction that that number would continue to double as far forward as we could see. This became known as Moore's Law. You might have heard of it. It's quite famous. So the first insight comes from Ray Kurzweil, he of the 86% accuracy rate. And what Kurzweil said was, hang on a minute, what if it's actually not about the transistors at all? So fun fact most people don't know about Moore's Law is that Gordon Moore made his famous prediction based on a data set of 4. He had 4 data points going back about how many transistors we could fit on an integrated circuit. But Kurzweil said, what if we zoom out on that? And instead of looking at the number of transistors we can fit on an integrated circuit, we look instead at what we might call the price performance of computing. How many million instructions per second can you buy for $1,000? Turns out that number has been doubling for almost 120 years. Starting way back with the beginning of computing with electromechanical punch cards, moving on to relays and then vacuum tubes and then transistors and only then integrated circuits. Moore's Law is actually the 5th iteration of this underlying doubling paradigm, not the first. Kurzweil called it the law of accelerating returns. Here's a way to think about it. Today, for $1,000, you can buy roughly the number of instructions per second that a mouse brain can process. But according to Kurzweil, by about 2023, just 5 years from now, for $1,000, you'll be able to buy the number of instructions per second that a human brain can process. And by 2049, for $1,000, you'll be able to buy the number of instructions per second of all human brains on the planet combined. This doubling curve explains why you today, via the smartphone in your pocket, have access to more information than Bill Clinton had the entire time that he was president of the United States. I reckon that's why he looks kind of pissed off in this picture. He's like, wish I had an iPhone. Although I'm sure he's super glad Instagram was not around when he was in office. Right, dodge a bullet there, Bill. Okay, so insight number 1, not just about the transistors, it's about the price performance of computing. Insight number 2 is that it's not just about computing. This doubling phenomenon applies to any technology once it becomes what we call information-enabled. Think about something like photography. Photography used to be substrate-enabled. It was dependent on the physical film for you to do the thing. And then it became information-enabled, dependent instead on ones and zeros. And once that happened, it started to follow a doubling in price performance, much like computing. The first digital camera had a resolution of 0.01 megapixel. Today, you can get a 41 megapixel camera as part of a smartphone, and we don't think that's weird. So some of the technologies that have become information enabled and are starting to follow doubling curves, computing obviously the base one, but also artificial intelligence, robotics, biotechnology, nanotechnology, gene sequencing, neuroscience, energy, all becoming powered by information, powered by ones and zeros, and all starting to follow similar doubling curves. So what is so important about this? Why should we care? Well, it turns out that doubling curves have a few characteristics that actually make them kind of imperative to pay attention to. And the first one is that they look flat for a really long time. And you'll know this if you've ever tried to do that trick where you fold a piece of paper in half 8 times. Anybody ever try that trick? First fold is easy, second fold is easy, third fold is easy, easy, easy. Like, this trick is so dumb, why am I even bothering? It's so easy. And it's not until you hit that 6th, 7th, 8th fold of the paper that things start to get a little crazy. The second characteristic is that our brains are totally not wired for this. We evolved on the savannah chasing prey and running from predators that behaved in a predictable, linear fashion. We evolved to understand that a lion could run from that end of the room to that end of the room, not to understand that a lion could run from that end of the room to the moon. And so as a result, the experts continue to predict linear. No matter how much evidence we have to the contrary, Gordon Moore himself twice said that Moore's law was over. Both times proven wrong. Like the guy who invented the law. He can't get his own law right. So I don't know what hope the rest of us have. But the difference between something following a linear trajectory and something following a doubling curve is insane. 30 linear steps, and I'm back out at the AV desk. 30 doubling steps, and I'm 26 times around the planet. And the tricky thing there is that you're not halfway until the 29th step. So it's really hard to measure progress as you go. I don't think there is a single person in this room, myself included, who could correctly guess where we would be at step 15 of this process. Our brains do not work this way. And so when we see doubling curves, we have to be systematic and disciplined in our assessment and our analysis of them if we want to have a hope of being able to respond effectively. Here's another way to think about it. That orange line is traditional linear business growth. It's held aloft by what we might call sustaining innovations. This is where your car goes from having an 8-track player to a cassette player to a CD player to a 6 CD changer. It's still pretty much doing the same thing, only a bit better, a bit better, a bit better. And that green curve is a doubling curve, looking flat for a really long time as the technology goes from 0.01 to 0.02 to 0.04 to 0.08. Like, sure, it's doubling, but from the outside, it still effectively looks like 0. And it's hanging out down there in what we call the trough of deception, disappointment, and disillusionment. And then what happens? You hit that inflection point, that 6th, 7th, 8th fold of the paper, and you go from deception and disillusionment into chaos and amazement, seemingly overnight. And all of the incumbents on that orange line say, it came out of nowhere. There's no way we could have known. The reason that I do this work is that I don't want people to be left saying, it came out of nowhere. There's no way we could have known. I want to tell you another story to really kind of drive home what this doubling phenomenon looks like. This is a story from quite long ago, the inventor of chess. He invented chess, he brought it to the king, and he said, "Sire, I have invented this wonderful new game, I gift it to you." And the king said, "This is indeed a brilliant game. We are so fortunate to have one such as you. I wish to reward you. How can I reward you? What would you like?" And the inventor of chess said, "I am but a humble man. I ask for not much, merely a single grain of wheat placed on the first square of the chessboard, and 2 grains of wheat on the second square, and 4 on the third, and 8 on the fourth, and so on until the board is full." And the king said to himself, "This man is very good with inventing games, but he does not understand his own value." And he readily agreed to what the inventor had asked. And of course, you can guess where we're going with this. By the time we got to the 64th square, we were looking at 18 quintillion grains of wheat with a total weight of 1.2 trillion metric tons. To put this in context, the total global output of wheat for all of 2017 was 753 million metric tons. So something like 1,600 times the total 2017 output of wheat was what the king would have had to give the inventor of chess. If you took all of those grains of wheat and laid them end to end, they would have reached Alpha Centauri and back. And again, to drive home how difficult it is for our brains to process doubling curves, I want you to think about this. All right, 1.2 trillion grains of wheat. Where do we think we would be at square 32 of the chessboard when we're halfway along? So I look at this and I go, okay, square 32, 1.2 trillion. Square 32, we're halfway. So half of 1.2 trillion is, 600 billion. 600 billion, but it's an exponential curve, so it's going to be a lot less than that. So let's say it's 600 million. Actually, it's going to be way less than that because I know everyone gets cut out on this stuff. So I'm going to reduce it even more. Let's just say it's 600,000. I'm just going to be super, super conservative on this, right? In reality, it's 279 metric tons. when you're halfway. This stuff is so hard to track. You have to pay such close attention to it if you want to have a hope of responding effectively. And while I'm giving this talk, what I want you to be thinking about is, what does it feel like to stand at the knee of that curve? What does it feel like to stand at that inflection point? And I show this to people, I say, what does it feel like? And what people say is, it feels exciting, or it feels scary, or it feels overwhelming. But the truth is, it doesn't feel like any of those things. It feels like nothing. Because we continually look backwards and use what we see looking backwards to project forwards. My core message to you is that we cannot use the past to predict the future anymore. When I first came back from SU, Singularity University, SU, that's what we call it. When I first came back from SU, I started giving these talks, and I would always include some whiz-bangy technology, like, look at this whiz-bangy technology, isn't that amazing that this is already here? That's not the critical message that I want you to take away. The core thing that I'm talking about is not about what technology is available at any given point in time. The critical thing that I want you to understand is how technology changes over time. That is the absolute fundamental critical message for you to take away. And now that I've been doing this for a while, I've had kind of a front row seat to see what this looks like in real time, and I want to talk you through that using one example, which is autonomous vehicles. So I come back from SU, March of 2015, and at that time, most people sort of knew that Google had an autonomous vehicle project on the go. In terms of like public awareness of autonomous vehicles, that's pretty much where we were at. In June of that year, June 2015, Google's self-driving car program hit 1 million miles traveled total. Massive accomplishment, massive milestone for them. Huge, pats on the back, et cetera. In October that year, October 2015, Tesla released a push update to owners of their Model S vehicle. This is a Tesla Model S. Push update, meaning it was delivered wirelessly overnight while you slept, didn't have to do anything to get it. You woke up in the morning and your car had autopilot functionality. By May the following year, less than a year after Google had logged 1 million miles traveled total, Tesla was collecting 1 million miles of data every 10 hours. By December that year, they had collected more than 1.2 billion miles worth of data. When we hit that inflection point, that 6th, 7th, 8th fold of the paper, the knee of that curve, we go from deception into chaos and amazement so much faster than we're prepared for. Safety statistics also increasing exponentially, and I will get to the news item from just a few days ago. But so typically, if you are running a pilot program in the US for autonomous vehicles, you're required to report your safety stats, and the metric that you use to report your safety stats is number of interventions per 1,000 miles. How many times in 1,000 miles of driving did the human have to take the wheel for safety reasons? So this is from Google's Waymo project. So Google now has a parent company called Alphabet. Alphabet's self-driving car division is called Waymo. So Waymo is basically the Google project. This is the Waymo safety stats. In 2015, they reported 0.8 interventions per 1,000 miles. 8 times in 10,000 miles, a human had to take the wheel for safety reasons. A year later, that number had dropped by 75%. 75% in just a year. And you might have seen a couple days ago, the self-driving Uber killed a pedestrian in Arizona. And certainly some people are saying, well, I hope this will finally get people to realize that we can now back off this self-driving nonsense. But of course, that's not what's going to happen at all. First of all, motor vehicles are the single most dangerous thing you can do in your life, right? 1.2 million people every year are killed in motor vehicle accidents. So one of the things we're going to have to get used to is adjusting our expectation of safety from a robot. If we switch over to the robots and only 500,000 people get killed, we save 700,000 lives a year, are we going to feel comfortable saying, oh, well, only 500,000 people got killed this year by robots? It sounds really difficult to think that way, but it's the way we have to think if we want to be effective. But the other critical thing about this is that what happens when a self-driving car hits a pedestrian? I don't actually know this number, but I should look it up. Like, how many pedestrians were killed by human-driven cars in the past week? Probably thousands, hundreds, thousands. Like, so it's going to be a decent number. Let's assume that that's reasonable, right? None of those is in the news. We haven't heard any information about what the response is to those accidents. But when something like this happens, immediately, representatives from the Transportation Safety Board, from the Highway Administration, from Uber, from Volvo, like everybody descends on the thing. What happened? What could they see? What couldn't they see? Was the sensor working? Was it not? Was it clogged? Was it a color adjustment? Was it contrast? Was it the human driver asleep at the wheel? Can we improve the interface between the car and the human driver? And what happens with these is, remember, what happens to those safety stats? They use all of that information to make it better. When is the last time you got into a car accident and became 1,000 times better driver as a result? It doesn't happen with humans, but with robots, it does. We are absolutely coming down the pike for this. In Christchurch, where I lived, in December 2016, the airport took possession of a self-driving shuttle. This is it, from a French company called Navia in partnership with HMI, who's also doing some work in Australia. A few months after they took possession, I caught up with the chief executive of the airport. I'm like, Malcolm, what's happening with the shuttle? Is it working? Is it good? What's going on? He goes, Kaila, the shuttle works awesome. Technology is perfect. He says, you wouldn't believe what the actual hurdles are to implementation of this technology. For example, in New Zealand, there is no law that says that you have to have a human behind the wheel of your vehicle. Not because we're particularly forward-thinking, largely because we never fathomed that you could ever not have a human being behind the wheel of your vehicle. There is a law that says that you have to have a rego in your front windscreen. So this is an electric vehicle, electric drivetrain. It goes equally in either direction, doesn't really distinguish between front and back. It effectively has two fronts, and you're not allowed to have two regos. Again, I don't think the people who made these policies were intentionally trying to be obstructive when they came up with this rule. They just never contemplated this scenario. But what's happening here is that we have an organization with the political will and the deep enough pockets to overcome those regulatory hurdles. And when I think about what they're doing at the airport, they are not doing a small pilot of how self-driving shuttles are going to affect Christchurch Airport. They are paving the way for ubiquitous adoption of self-driving vehicles across New Zealand. Because once those hurdles are overcome for them, they are overcome for everyone. So when you think about what has to happen for technology to become adopted, it's not enough that the technology is ready. You also have to look at the regulatory environment. You have to look at the market appetite. You have to look at the investment environment, right? And when all of those things start to align, that's when you should have massive red flags saying this technology is about to go from deception into amazement. Right, I'm going to skip this quickly. Oh, he's the former vice chairman of General Motors. He thinks it's going to be illegal for humans to drive on the highway within 15 to 20 years. Okay, here's another example of how quickly these things change. You might have heard this story from mid-2016. Google's DeepMind artificial intelligence group, they came out with an artificially intelligent Go player called AlphaGo. Go is an ancient game. It's one of the most complex games known to man. The number of possible moves in Go is greater than the number of atoms in the universe. And in May of 2016, AlphaGo beat the world champion Lee Sedol at Go. This was a massive, massive accomplishment. It happened fully a decade before the researchers expected it to happen. It was a huge milestone in terms of artificial intelligence, one of those kind of holy grail moments. That was May of 2016. A year later, DeepMind came out with a new artificially intelligent Go player, AlphaGo Zero. So the original AlphaGo beat Lee Sedol 4-1. AlphaGo Zero beat the original AlphaGo 100-0, which is amazing by itself, but even more interesting is how they trained it. So with an artificial intelligence, you need to train it for what it's looking for. So if you want to train an artificial intelligence to be able to recognize cats in images, you feed it thousands of pictures of cats, and then it parses all those cats, and then it goes, okay, so cats have pointy ears, but maybe one of them's been chewed off, so I also need to look for whiskers and a nose that's shaped like this, and eyes that are shaped like that. And so eventually it's able to recognize cats. And that's how they trained the first AlphaGo. They gave it 40 million historic games of Go. And it parsed all of those games and was able to interpret and assess and go, okay, in any given situation, this is my best possible move. But with AlphaGo Zero, they didn't feed it a single game. They gave it the rules, and they gave it the desired outcome. And it played itself, starting with random play. Literally any move will do, and we'll see what happens. 4.9 million times it played itself. And within 3 days was the best Go player in the world. When we hit that inflection point, we go from deception into chaos so fast, and I will not let you walk away saying it came out of nowhere. There's no way we could have known. Right, insight number one, not about the transistors, it's about the price performance of computing. Insight number two, not just about computing, it's about any information-enabled technology. Insight number three is that these technologies are now starting to converge. And so now we have to consider what happens when an exponential progression in something like artificial intelligence converges with an exponential progression in robotics, and we get super intelligent robots. What happens when an exponential progression in biotechnology or bioengineering converges with an exponential progression in 3D printing at the molecular level, when we can literally print matter molecule by molecule? And of course, what happens is that everything accelerates even faster. What does all of this add up to? Huge opportunity. Opportunity like nothing we've ever seen in history. Opportunity to solve for some of humanity's biggest challenges, to solve for healthcare, for education, for energy, for drought, to make these things free and accessible to everyone on the planet. But that opportunity comes along with a not insignificant amount of terror. In 2013, a now famous paper from Frey and Osborne suggested that 47 to 81% of jobs, as we currently understand them, would be under threat from technology within 20 years. In 2015, the Committee for the Economic Development of Australia said that number was 40% of Australian jobs within 10 to 15 years. That is 2025 to 2030. It's not very far away at all. You might have seen this story from about a year and a half ago, Apple's Foxconn factory in China. They fired 60,000 people and replaced them with robots. This is a terrible story. These are real people with real lives, real families. Like they're real. I don't want to diminish or dismiss in any way the impact on these people. To be fair, 60,000 people in China it's pretty much a rounding error. But in December that year, Foxconn came out with a three-part strategy to automate all of their factories. Foxconn employs 1.2 million people. And if you think they can't do this, they absolutely can. This factory in Dongguan in China, they fired 90% of their staff, replaced them with robots. Output went up 2.5 times, defects down 80%. They went from 650 people to 60 people. And the scary thing here is that I look at this and I go, if I'm the factory owner or the chief executive, of course I'm going to buy the robots. You'd be crazy not to. And if you're not buying the robots, your competition's buying the robots, and they're going to have an unfair advantage, and you're going to go out of business. But that decision that makes total sense at the micro level, in aggregate, has potentially catastrophic consequences for society. To be fair again, though, to those of us in the Western world, this plot line is a familiar one, right? This is a narrative, this is a story we've heard before. Factory workers replaced by automation. That story's 200 years old. We're a little bit less used to stories like this one, artificially intelligent lawyer hired by its first law firm. Or this one, artificially intelligent chatbot successfully contests 160,000 parking tickets in New York and London. I love this. It's a free service. It was created by a 19-year-old kid. It's called Do Not Pay. Or this one, artificially intelligent teaching assistant helps students online for an entire semester, and nobody noticed. I don't know what that says for the quality of our teaching assistants. But the reason these stories are becoming possible is because the cognitive capabilities of the computers are starting to become so good that they are now encroaching upon domains that have historically been exclusively reserved for humans, like image recognition. Image recognition is something humans are awesome at, and computers have always been terrible at. Humans are awesome at this because we have an evolutionary imperative to be awesome at this. When you're a baby, you have 2 jobs: find your mom and find the boob. That is all you need to do to be successful as a baby. Those are your KPIs. And if you're successful as a baby, you are more likely to reproduce, and you will pass on those mom-finding and boob-finding genes to your offspring, and we just get better and better at it, right? It's an evolutionary imperative. But within a few years, researchers using deep learning algorithms have gone from being able to recognize cats in images, to being able to recognize numbers in images, to being able to recognize mitosis in cancer cells, which currently requires a trained pathologist. Except the computer can do it 1,000 times as fast and 1,000 at a time, and will only ever get better. Every new human pathologist has to start from 0. Every new computer starts with the sum total of all the knowledge of all the previous computers, which is why these things progress exponentially. We are continually using better tools to build better tools. So that's the terror. But F. Scott Fitzgerald said the mark of a first-rate mind is the ability to hold 2 opposing thoughts simultaneously and still retain the ability to function. By many metrics, 2017 was the best year ever in history. The smallest share of our population was hungry, impoverished, or illiterate. Every single day, 217,000 people are lifted out of extreme poverty. Every single day, 325,000 people gain access to electricity, and every single day, 300,000 people gain access to clean drinking water. If you, for some reason, had to go and get a scan and had to get a diagnosis, wouldn't you want 100% accurate diagnosis from an AI and have your human doctor's role to be to hold your hand and walk you through your treatment options and discuss pros and cons with you and help your family navigate what is a highly uncertain and stressful time? Isn't that a better definition of labor? That chatbot, the one that contested all the parking tickets, is now being used to help refugees claim asylum. This is a company from SU. It's called MatterNet. It's using drones to deliver food and essential medicines to the 2 billion people around the world who don't have access to all-season roads. And when they started this project, the drones could only carry so much and they could only travel so far. But that technology is progressing exponentially. And these guys can scale their impact while the underlying technology scales. I want to just tell you a quick story, because the thing that happened to me when I came away from SU, and the thing that I hope you take away from my talk, it's not about any one individual technology. Most of the stuff we talked about, I'd heard about already. I'd heard about 3D printing, I'd heard about autonomous vehicles, I'd heard about artificial intelligence. Like, I'd heard about all these things before. That's not what was so mind-blowing for me. What was so mind-blowing for me was not any one technology, but what SU did was it took all of those disparate data points and pulled them together into a new coherent narrative that made me go, oh my gosh, I see this in a way I completely have not seen it before. So I want to give you an example of what I mean by that, using 3D printing. 3D printing, I had heard about before I went to SU. I did not realize until I went there that 3D printing has been around for over 35 years. That was new to me. Over 35 years, probably close to 40 years now. Over 35 years, and everyone you ever talk to about 3D printing, they're like, oh my gosh, it's going to revolutionize everything. And what have we actually gotten? Shitty models of Yoda's head. Like, this is not revolutionary, okay? There is no incumbent Yoda's head model industry that's freaking out right now because the printers are coming. But so I leave SU with my new coherent narrative, this new paradigm, and a week after going to SU, I went to TED, and at TED, it's another conference, and this guy, Joseph DeSimone, got up on stage, and he was like, 3D printing is terrible. This is terrible. And the reason it's so terrible is that it's not actually 3D printing at all. It's 2D printing over and over again, right? You print a layer, and another layer, and another layer, and another layer. And so as a result, there are all sorts of problems with it. You can't really do bridges, you can't do spans, you can't do objects within objects, the mechanical tolerances are terrible, the structural integrity is terrible, it's super slow, and it's super expensive. So DeSimone's like, I don't want a 3D printer that's a 2D printer over and over again. I want a 3D printer that works more like the T-1000 from Terminator 2. I want my object to just emerge from the soup, fully formed. I want it to just be the thing. And so he built it. That's what he was there to launch. This is it. It's called CLIP, Continuous Liquid Interface Production. That plate at the top pulls the object fully formed from that tray of substrate soup at the bottom. It solves every issue with current 3D printing. You can do bridges, you can do spans, you can do objects within objects. The mechanical tolerances are perfect. The structural integrity is perfect. It's 25 to 100 times faster than current 3D printing technology. So I watched him give this talk, and I had 3 reactions. And my first reaction was what it would have been anyway, which was like, whoa, that's really cool. Nice job, dude. But my second reaction, fresh from SU, fresh with my new coherent narrative, my new paradigm, was, of course, it's 25 to 100 times faster, and not, 7% faster. Of course, as DeSimone says, the next iteration will be 1,000 times faster, because that's what an exponential curve looks like. And my third reaction was, now I get it. Now I get how 3D printing totally disrupts global manufacturing and freight. Because why would you ever pay to manufacture 20,000 of something in China and pay to ship it and pay to store it and have waste and have loss and have theft and have it go out of date, when you literally can push the button and get the thing? We cannot use the past as a means of predicting the future. A couple months ago, researchers at the Lawrence Livermore Lab came out with a new holographic 3D printing technique. It prints complete objects in seconds. And because of these trajectories, a recent report from ING suggested that 40% of global trade would be wiped out, their words, not mine, wiped out by 2040 because of 3D printing. That's just 22 years away. So what does all of this have to do with you? Well, what I want to talk to you guys about is 3 vectors of disruption that I use to think about how technologies will affect any industry. And the first vector is where we take what we're currently doing and we automate it. So what does that look like? It looks like self-driving tractors, which are already in existence. It looks like robots that can pick apples. This robot can pick 10,000 apples in an hour. It never needs a break, never gets sick, doesn't need any visas, super easy to work with. We've got this hen robot that the chicks flock to for some reason, even though it looks nothing like a hen, but it basically drives around and makes noises, and the chicks follow it all over the place. This one's coming out of the Australian Centre for Field Robotics. This one's called Swagbot. It's used to herd animals, but it can also tow things. It can also monitor drones, so you can send drones up from the roof of it. Absolutely, we should be looking at these things. That's the first vector of disruption. It's basically taking what we currently do and automating it. The second vector is what I think of as orthogonal disruption. So this is where a massive change in price performance in something that seems totally unrelated to our industry actually has a big impact on our industry. And so I'm going to talk, it's not just necessarily about beef, but it is about agriculture generally. So this is a price performance chart of LED lighting. And LED lighting, all these price performance charts, they're all saying the same thing. They all look slightly different, right? But basically what we're looking at is how much performance can you get for a fixed price, or how much is price coming down for a fixed level of performance. This is the price performance of LED lighting. That red line's price, that blue line is lifespan. In the past 6 or 7 years, LED lighting's come down in price by about 90%. Lifespan has doubled. So I saw this chart and I'm like, okay, cool. So what does that mean? I guess it'll be cheaper to buy a light bulb and it'll last longer. Like, I don't know about you guys, light bulb expenditure is not like high on my list in terms of things I think about with my household budget. Turns out what it actually disrupts is indoor farming. So indoor farming, because LED lighting and the associated technologies used to be so expensive, indoor farming was reserved for certain, should we call them high value crops? But now, because we're seeing this massive exponential curve in terms of LED lighting and the associated technologies, we're seeing indoor farms that are competing with traditional farms. Up until last year, the world's largest indoor farm was in Japan. It was 100 times more productive per square foot than a traditional farm. It used 40% less power, generated 80% less food waste, and critical, in a country like Australia and in a region like the Northern Territory, used 99% less water. That was up until about a year ago. About a year ago, a new world's largest indoor farm opened up in New Jersey. It's called Aero Farms. It's supplying produce to New York City groceries at price parity with organic produce coming out of California. It's housed in a disused paintball facility. Their rent is near zero. Their food miles are near zero. And quick show of hands, who in this room would love to have total control over the weather? Everybody. Right. Okay, we're also seeing in your industry, this was just a few days ago, Dow DuPont has just signed a deal with an organization called Planet to supply satellite imagery to farmers. Planet has 6 years of daily photography, and the guy that they talked about, I forget his name, but he talked about eyes on acre, like how many eyes you have per acre of farming, and basically what these guys are saying is that as long as there is no cloud cover, you can have eyes on every acre every single day. This is coming down the pike from Dow DuPont very quickly. All right, those are 2 of the vectors of disruption, but the last one is sort of the most controversial. I've saved the best for last. So this is where we're talking about bioengineered animal protein, alternatives to the kind of stuff that you guys produce. And when I was at SU, we had this guy get up on stage. His name is Raymond McCauley. He's the digital biology guy. And he gets up on stage and he talks to us about bioengineered milk. And this team, they had taken like a yeast and genetically modified it with some cow proteins, and they basically brewed milk in the lab. And chemically and at a molecular level, it was identical to, I mean, it was milk, right? It was milk. It just had not gone through a cow. And they'd done this with cow milk, and they'd done this with human milk, and they'd done this with narwhal milk. You guys know narwhals, the unicorns of the sea? Like, why narwhal milk? I don't know. Scientists are weird. But they'd made all these milks, and I am watching Raymond talk, and my reaction to it is, that sounds disgusting. Who's going to want it? All right, set that to one side for a second. Late that night, I'm having an offline conversation with Salim Ismail. He's the founding executive director of SU. And we weren't talking about the milk. We were talking about a company called Modern Meadow. They do bioengineered eggs. And I'll tell you what, I'm a little embarrassed to admit this in this group, but I am a super lefty liberal hippie. I need to know the name of the chicken before I'll eat an egg. And so he's telling me about the bioengineered eggs, and I am like, that sounds disgusting. My reaction is the same as my reaction to the milk. It sounds gross. Who's going to want it? And Salim says, Kaila, they're not targeting you. They don't care about you. They're not interested in the hippies. They're not interested in the vegans. They don't even care about Whole Foods, which in the US is a substantial customer. He says they're after the industrial caterers who buy eggs by the thousands of kilos. And they need them in powder form, and in liquid form, and in tube form. And they need them to last longer on the shelf, and be 100% salmonella free, and total certainty of supply. And they need them to brown nicely around the edges, and taste more like egg. And they need them to be cheaper. And by every one of those metrics, the bioengineered product wins. And I went, shit, you're right. And I went, actually, maybe the bioengineered milk product wins too. And then I went, actually, maybe there's a lot more to this bioengineered animal protein thing than I thought. I realize I'm just about out of time, but I did start a couple minutes late, so I'm going to steal my time back. I'm just going to take a quick detour to really drive home the possible impact of these technologies. A quick detour. So this is another one of those price performance charts. Again, it looks slightly different. They're all mapping the same exact thing. This is the price performance of energy by different fuel type. This chart is called Welcome to the Terror Dome. I didn't name it that. For me, this is a happy chart. The people who made this chart gave it that name. That's the good folks at the CIA, the World Bank, and the Energy Information Administration. What we're mapping here is price performance of energy by different fuel types. On the y-axis, we've got the price per million BTUs. On the x-axis, we've got the year. We're starting in 1949. We've got 5 fuel types, but 4 of them start in 1949 and bump along the bottom. They bump along, they bump along, they go up, they go down, they go up, they go down, and over time, they gradually trend upwards. Those are our linear technologies. Those are our fossil fuels. This is what linear technologies do in terms of price performance. They bump along, they go up and down, and over time, they gradually trend upwards. And then what happens? It doesn't even come onto the chart until like 2007. And when it comes onto the chart, it's so expensive that all of the incumbents are like, it's never going to be a thing. We never have to worry about it. And then the price plummets, comes down almost in a straight line. That's solar. Solar is information-enabled energy. It is powered by ones and zeros, and it is doubling in price performance faster than Moore's Law. Last year, we saw places where it was cheaper to build and operate a new solar plant than it was to just maintain an existing coal plant. So when we see this kind of price trajectory, all of a sudden, the alignment, remember those incentives, right? It's not just that the technology is ready. What's the investment appetite? What's the market appetite? What does the price look like in terms of market comparison? All of a sudden we go, this is going to be a massive tipping point in terms of our shift away from fossil fuels. All right, everybody understand this chart? You understand what you're looking at? Like I've explained it clearly, yeah? You can make sense of it? Okay, so my team, based on an idea by my friend Grant Ryan, decided to do this with bioengineered meat. So this is exactly the same as the previous chart. Y-axis, we've got the cost per kilogram. X-axis, we've got the year. We only go back to 1980. That was all the data we could find, but you get the idea. The blue line is the cost per kilogram of ground chuck 100% beef. That orange line is chicken. And what do these two lines do? They bump along, they go up and they go down. And over time, they gradually trend upwards. We hit a high point in about 2014 of $9.87 a kilo of beef. We've come off from that a bit. I'm sure we would all agree that if we were going to zoom out another 10, 20 years, that gradually the price line would continue to trend upwards. Cost of living, inflation, pretty basic, right? Anybody want to see it with the bioengineered product? Okay, first of all, we had to shift the scale altogether. We're now on a log scale, which means instead of going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we go 1, 10, 100, 1,000. We had to shift it because we couldn't fit it otherwise. Our first data point for a kilogram of lab-grown meat comes in at just under $2.3 million. Our second data point comes in at just under $40,000. Our third data point comes in at $80. $80 is still a lot of money for a kilogram of beef. Does anybody in this room doubt that that price will continue to come down? China recently signed a $300 million deal to invest in 3 lab-grown meat producers in Israel. That is a drop in the bucket in terms of China, but remember that inflection point. Remember what those curves look like and how deceptive they are. Impossible Foods, which is one of the leaders in this stuff in the US, they have a burger made from plants that sizzles and bleeds. And they are serving this in restaurants that are, their go-to-market strategies to work with the highest end chefs in America so that this is considered a premium product, more desirable than the traditional product. They've gotten $278 million worth of investment. Beyond Meat, which is another one of the leaders in this, these guys have just 2 days ago announced that they've served 11 million burgers so far. They're in 5,000 grocery stores across the US. They're in 6,000 restaurants across the US. They are absolutely skyrocketing. And this is the chief executive of Tyson Foods, which is the second biggest producer of beef, chicken, and pork in the world. And he said that plant-based protein is growing faster than animal-based protein at this point, and he thinks they're going to continue in that direction. Tyson is now investing in many of these alternative protein startups. So what are you guys going to do? I know I am out of time, but I would say that you have a choice. And your choice is you can either embrace what's happening in terms of the bioengineered and plant-based movement, in terms of this alternative protein clean meat startup, or you can go hard out in the other direction. I had a good chat with James Christian from the NTCA yesterday, and he was saying that, you know, some people had thought that Australia could be the food bowl of Asia. You can't be. He said, actually, what you could be is the delicatessen. But if you're going to be the delicatessen, then in order to compete in this market, you have to go hard out in that direction. Not just organic, like 100% biodynamic certified, scan the meat and see the video of the kids swimming in the stream next to the pasture because the riparian management's done so well, like hard out, and you have to really tell that story. To me, those are the only two options for you. The only thing that is not an option is standing still. Thank you very much.